Our today's speaker is Mr. Wayne Menuz, member of the FRPSL. The topic is Postal Stationery Airgraphs of India. Wayne switched from collecting stamps to only postal stationery about in 1959. He spent a summer working for Higgins and Gates in 1971 and in 1977 obtained accreditation for judging USA exhibitions. His postal stationery exhibits have won large gold medals as well as grand awards. He is president of the United Postal Stationery Society and the editor of its journal Postal Stationery since 2001. He has also been awarded many large golds and two reserve grand awards. His most recent work is the 2025 British East Asia Postal Stationery Catalogue of 300 pages. Over to you, Mr. Wayne Menuz.
Thank you so much. Back a few years ago, I wrote a book called Postal Stationery Airgraphs. And there's only a few countries of the world that issued postal stationery airgraphs. And those are defined as airgraph forms that had the indicium, or what some people call the stamp, printed on them instead of using adhesive stamps. So let's start from the beginning. In the middle of about 1941, after France collapsed, and then it also shows Africa, and then also in the Far East after the Japan attacked. You can see all the countries in purple either belong to the Axis powers or their colonies, and or in the gold colors, the Japanese area. You can see that the Mediterranean was pretty much closed to Allied shipping and especially aircraft. And so getting mail, for example, to Cairo, Egypt, and then on to India and other places, only had to go around the African the continent. And so Great Britain needed to send thousands of letters per day to and from soldiers, because otherwise morale would collapse if they couldn't hear from home. And cargo aircraft were in those days very small. They only carried a small amount of cargo. The planes were small. And so they needed to find a way to deliver mail rapidly to their soldiers in the Far East and in the Near East. Okay, so the solution was the airgraph. And basically an airgraph is a roll of microfilm. And there you see a developed roll in the picture. It weighed only 5 ounces, that whole roll, and it could hold 1,600 single sheet letters, which would normally have weighed 50 pounds. And you can see from the enlargement there that the microfilm was actually 16 millimeter film cut in half. So it only has sprocket holes on one side. And it's a special high density film that would accept small images at great clarity. So in order for the system to work, you needed a standardized paper form for the person to write on. And these were standardized at 8.5 by 11 inches in size. And this whole system was invented by Kodak, and they called it, they used a special camera. It was called the Recordac. They made the microfilm at the sending station, and then they used special machinery that was the same machinery used to develop motion pictures. but the machinery was modified so that it only had half a sprocket. Otherwise, it's very similar for using for motion pictures. And then and then the system used standardized window envelopes where the airgraph that was printed would be inside, and then that would be put in the mail stream. And since the postage had been prepaid when the person bought the original form, they had to mark it somehow so that the postal system along the way would not charge it postage due. So here are a couple forms. Initially, the forms had the address box at the bottom, and then they moved it to the top because London, which received and sent about 50% of all the airgraphs, had special machinery designed to stuff the envelopes, and it needed to be at the top. Airgraphs have a printed border and the form. Now, these two are pieces of actual paper, 8.5 by 11, and the borders are designed so that the user would not write in the border, and so that way the camera would not miss any of the writing when it was taking the picture. Okay, the back of the forms contained a space for an adhesive stamp. Okay, and these the postal stationery term for a postal form that requires the user to put his own stamps on is called a formular. And so, however, a few countries issued airgraph forms with the stamp impressed on them, called the indicium, and India is one of them. So about 95% of all the types of paper forms are formulas, and there's been several catalogs down through the years delineating all these forms. So most of them printed locally, and just thousands of different types. Okay, so here's the Recordac machine, and you can see the operator slipped into a slot the 8.5 by 11 form, and when it got down inside, it triggered an electric eye, which opened and closed the camera shutter one time, and then it advanced the film one reel, or not one reel, one frame, so that the lady there would be able to do 1,600 images of the forms. In London and in the big operations, they always had teams of 6 Recordac machines with one supervisor. The cameras were hand wound, so they had to be continually wound back in those days. Now, this is just some of the developing machinery. This one here is the negatives from the microfilm being, it's in a dark room here, and it's being developed on the rolls of photographic paper. You can see the rolls and the spindles there, and this is London. And the operators the machinery will develop one frame from the microfilm onto one portion of the roll of photographic paper. And then the photographic paper has to be fixed and then dried. And here you see one such operation in London here. So this is all special machinery developed by Kodak. And here you see the forms that were printed in the rolls, they're being cut into individual airgraphs. So just to keep in mind that the paper 8.5 by 11 is called an airgraph form, and what results is an airgraph. And that we're looking at airgraph, rolls of airgraph. You can see the lady on the right there, right here. You can see the roll of airgraphs coming out. The airgraph itself is 1/4 the size of the original form. So standardized envelopes were issued in all the places in order to accept the airgraph. If it was folded such that the address showed through the window. They mostly have on the front some sort of a postage paid indicator, so that when it was put in the mail stream, it was not charged postage due. Now, here's one. By the way, each country made its own airgraph forms. By the way, the word airgraph was a trademark for Kodak. Um, there is no way today to determine that the content of an envelope originated in that envelope. So the one in the upper right, that airgraph inside there could have been an airgraph from any country, and once you take it out, there's no way to tie the two together. So that's just the way it is. Uh, the one on the left is an Indian one. You can see what happens when it got in the mail and they couldn't find the recipient. Unfortunately, the original airgraph has been lost. So here's the airgraph system as operated eventually. Okay. It started between London and Cairo. That was the first one. And then it started expanding, added countries like Nairobi and so forth. Colombo, Ceylon was the last country to be added. Okay, so this chart on the left has to do with Indian airgraphs. Okay, so for Bombay, it was open to send an airgraph to London effective 1942, both civilian and armed forces. Then to Toronto 6 months later, Melbourne, Australia, Wellington, New Zealand, and then Calcutta, which opened a year later, was the same as the same places as above on that date. Okay, service to Canada from India originally started, like it says, in October, but it was Toronto had no developing facilities, so they were forwarded. By the way, the airplanes would fly from Bombay to Nairobi, down to Johannesburg, up the west coast of Africa, and then on to London in those days. And so London had the developing facilities, and so sending mail to Toronto, to Canada, it went to London first, where it was developed, and then it was put by ship across the Atlantic. And then in December 42, the airgraphs were sent by plane, and the airgraphs were the printed airgraphs were sent from London by plane, and then finally, when in 43, when they had longer range planes, the actual microfilm was flown directly to Toronto for developing. Okay, here's something that people don't really understand well, and it's important to understand. The note at the bottom. The microfilm carriers could only be sent to developing facilities linked to a sending station. For example, you could not send an airgraph from Colombo to Bombay. Okay, so the system was designed so that only mail in routes that were impractical to send paper were utilized. And obviously, it was very practical to send paper letters and aerograms and so forth from Colombo to Bombay. So that from Bombay, for example, you could only send to the countries noted on the left. You could not send it to Nairobi or Naples or Johannesburg or anything like that, because those destinations could be reached by ship in friendly waters or by plane and so forth, because they were close by. Okay. So here's an example of an airgraph form that was addressed to a non-linked destination. Okay. So here the person has sent one to the USA. Well, the USA was not in the system, and so therefore it could not be sent. So the airgraph system would then attach a label, usually like you see here, and they would then fold the actual 8.5 by 11 form down to a small size like you see in the picture up there, and actually just put it in the mail. And the form is covering the address, but it's only stapled at one end or glued at one end, and so it could be picked, it could be lifted up, and so the address could be seen. So this airgraph form is actually a used form, and they're known from around, but they're all they're very hard to find. They're very difficult to find, as you can imagine, because very few of these of the people most of the time the airgraph office would refuse to accept the form. But in a number of cases, because of the high volume, it would be accepted inadvertently. And then when they started to, process it, someone would notice that it's addressed to a non-linked station, and then it would be handled this way. Here's another one. This is another used form, and it's, again. See, the person thought that he could send it to the United States via Canada, but the system did not work that way. And since the 8.5 by 11 piece of paper was just a piece of paper, a person could make a drawing or even print a scene on it or anything they wanted. It was just a piece of paper that was then microfilmed. And here's one more. And all these three are from the collection of Sandeep Jaswal. Now, this one here is unusual in that it was correctly addressed to Toronto, but the airgraph services stopped on August 1, 1945. Now, this is before the end of the war, but by this time, the Mediterranean was open, airplanes were much larger, and the very costly system of doing all this microfilming and so forth no longer was justified. So people, the British Empire introduced lower rates for aerograms, paper aerograms, and then the ships and the planes could carry it. So they shut the whole system down August 1, 45. Okay, so this is a lot of reading here, but okay. The forms required from India required the user to apply postage. And like I said, this was typical for almost all countries. They used adhesive stamps on the back. And by the way, when these things are microfilmed, you don't see the stamps because they're on the other side. So the microfilm, the airgraph that you see, the small 1/4 size airgraph doesn't show the stamps. Okay, a filled out airgraph normally could be mailed to the airgraph section from wherever they were at. They could only be put into the Indian mail postage free, the actual 8.5 by 11 form. Forms from service personnel serving in India that would be conveyed by the military postal unit. Starting in 42, inbound to India microfilm was developed and printed in Cairo, and then flown on to Karachi, where they were placed into envelopes and put in the system. In September of 42, they finally had the developing facility, very complicated chemical system and whatnot, began operation. And then the fee schedule initially was The military was 3 annas. You can see what it is there. I won't read it. And military included, if your mail was addressed to a military person, you were a civilian, but you addressed it to a military person that also was at the military rate. But if you're going civilian to civilian, then the rates were higher. Okay. Ceylon had a facility from March, but did not have any developing and printing, very similar. So inbound microfilm was developed and printed in Bombay and then sent on to Ceylon for putting it in envelopes and in the mail. Now, it's interesting. So everybody was using formular airgraph forms, which, again, required the user to put stamps on. But the Times of India in July 43 reported that they had found a fraud operating. And the fraud was that postal employees were pilfering stamps from airgraph forms before they were microfilmed and destroying the forms and taking the pilfered, soaked off stamps and putting them on low denomination post orders and then cashing them for cash. So India announced in 43 that they were now going to make postal stationery airgraphs, which could then not be cut out. So the first ones, and the numbers are from a book I'll explain a little bit later. So they had one for the 3 annas for the military and 8 annas for the civilian. And the front side of the forms look the same. And you can see on the right-hand side, they look the same. This was printed by the government printer. There's many airgraph forms, mostly formulars, that were printed by military units, given to civilian contractors to print. Again, there's just thousands of these different forms. And this is the back side of the form with all the instructions anyway, there's the instructions and what it looks like on the back side. And then, when the civilian rate was reduced to 4 annas, in order to make they used added an additional indicium of 1 anna from the excess forms that they had to make the 4 anna rate. And they also took some of the now obsolete 8 anna rate and overprinted it 4 annas. This overprinted airgraph form is particularly rare, actually. I'm only aware of maybe 6 or 7 copies known. Now, a question that I have never been able to answer is, did India sell formular forms with adhesive stamps applied by the post office? So it's based on this postal notice here. It says, with effect from July 45, the sale of unembossed airgraph forms with adhesive stamps of the appropriate value affixed thereon will be discontinued. Well, that suggests that, to me anyway, that they were previously on sale. So anyway, these are, and then the Times of India in 44 says a limited number of attractive Christmas airgraph forms are on sale at all important offices. You can buy one for 4 annas if you're a civilian, for 3 annas if you're a member of the defense service. Okay, so the implication is that all airgraph paper forms were free throughout the British Empire. No country, no operation charged for the form. They were free. So if the Indian post office is selling these at the rate of 4 annas, it would imply that either the post office applied adhesive stamps on the back, or that the forms, by their very nature of being Christmas greetings, were considered already postage paid. So what I've been searching for many years is a mint postal airgraph form, such as the one on the right, where I can see the back and there's an adhesive stamp applied, and I have never seen such a form. And of course, there's a lot of airgraphs that were printed from these forms in existence. And of course, the problem is that you only see this side here, and the other side that would have had the adhesive stamp is not microfilmed, and so you cannot tell. So now this here is a paper form. This here are two airgraphs. They're 1/4 size. They're just different ones. You can see the one on the left that's been cut a little askew, and so the top of the airgraph actually shows the bottom of the preceding one on the roll. Anyway, so these are actual airgraphs, and there's really no way to know whether or not they had adhesive stamps on the back. And of course, even if they had, we don't know if the government put them on or the user did. You might note that they're numbered. That was part of the system, and the airgraph canister would be sent to destination, and the original forms would not be destroyed until they got confirmation that the roll had been received and not lost in an accident or whatever, and that the actual form itself was properly able to be printed. In the case where it was not properly printed or lost, then the original paper forms would be microfilmed and sent again. And then only when they got confirmation for each number would they then destroy the original airgraph form. Here's a couple more. These are forms, and again, whether or not they were actually formulars and therefore not postal stationery, or they had adhesive stamps applied by the post office, which does make them postal stationery, I don't know. And a couple more. Now, these pictures that you see here were primarily done by the unit, the military unit involved, the RAF or other group. And they would make wood printing blocks and print up the paper forms and for Christmas. And this was the equivalent of sending, of course, a Christmas card to loved ones back home. Okay, so here's a little interesting statistics. So Bombay printed 20 million airgraphs, and those arrived from Algiers, Cairo, London, Melbourne, and Wellington. And you can see the number, and the civilians, it was 3 million. Obviously, Cairo was only after the Allies had secured North Africa, and Naples was only opened after they secured the southern Italy. And then Calcutta was only from London, and you see the number. So India, total airgraphs from India was 25 million. Of all countries involved in the airgraph system was 313 million, which you can see the volume that was required. It was just pretty staggering. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, by the end of 44, the Allies had pretty much made all the transportation routes available for their own use. Starting in February, airmail letters became free from the military. You have to recall that all during the war, surface mail envelope mail, first class mail from active duty service personnel was always free in the British system. However, because it was surface mail and the distances were so long that they needed airmail, and airmail was not free. However, in like I said, in February of 45, in these areas here initially, and then it became worldwide. The British made airmail, military mail free for active duty service personnel. And so, since airmail, you could send a letter or an aerogram for very little money. It was actually a little bit less than the airgraph. That's the reason they ceased the operation. And an envelope had more privacy, obviously, and you could enclose things like pictures and so forth. So when they closed it down in July 45, they accepted no more airgraph forms, and the ones in the system that had been microfilmed were flown, developed, and that was the end of it. So when the system was closed, since the since the Indian aircraft forms had been purchased by the user, and if they were still unused, the person would be at a loss because they couldn't be used then. They permitted aircraft forms to be returned to the Indian Post Office for a partial refund until the end of the year. Okay. This here is a book I wrote back 6 years ago now, and this book contains the story of the first half of the book is nothing but the airgraph system around the world, and whether it's postal stationery or just formular forms. It explains in much greater detail the information I presented in this program here today. Much deeper information about how the system worked, the recording systems, many more pictures, tons of more pictures, many of them courtesy of the British Museum. And so it's just a much more in-depth book of if you're interested in airgraphs, I might recommend you pick up a copy. It's available at the UPSS website. You see it there, upss.org, and it's $34 postpaid anywhere in the world. So anyway, I just wanted to make mention. I'm not trying to plug the book, but if you have information, if you're seeking information a lot more about how the whole system operated, it's actually in that book. Well, that's it, I guess. So I'll leave this up for a minute. So if somebody wants to write down my address. Oh, I have a typo. I'm sorry. I just noticed that. Geez. Okay, my address is UPSS-ED at PAC. There's an extra V in there. Don't put the V in. I'm not sure where that came from. So it's PACBELL.net.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Wayne. That was absolutely fantastic.
You're welcome.